And welcome back to day one of the B20 summit. And we're finishing off strongly because I'd like to welcome somebody who's no stranger to us here in South Africa from a financial perspective. It's none other than former finance minister, and in his current capacity, the G20 Africa Panel Expert Chairperson, none other than Trevor Manuel. Mr. Manuel, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you very much. Shukran for the opportunity.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Mr. Manuel, yesterday the report was handed over to President Cyril Ramaphosa. In terms of global economic policy, what have you assessed from this year that will bring the necessary equality that we are looking for?
There are some issues that we've highlighted in the report that speak to practices that are manifestly unequal. You can take the example of the cost of capital, and the cost of capital is driven by features such as the behavior of the ratings agencies. We don't actually know what they do because the methodology in use is actually not exposed. So they rate one country this way and another country the other way. There's another feature of that, and that is that countries are faced with a situation where interest rates are so high and they ramp up all the time, so that a number of countries on the continent now spend more on debt service costs than they do on healthcare, and a slightly smaller number than what they do on education. Now, if you don't provide healthcare for people, if we don't educate people, then it has a long tail. Future generations will suffer, and the inequality of the present will still be a feature of the future. So that's one issue. It's just the cost of capital that is a very big issue. And if countries borrow at those prohibitive rates, then we don't deal with issues. There are some issues that we have to do in this regard as well, and that is that we are 54 countries on the continent, and each one of us engages in borrowing on our own terms, whereas somehow we need to realize economies of scale. And if we worked at those issues differently, we will be able to secure better deals for our people. That's one set of issues. There are also matters relating to domestic resource mobilization. It speaks to taxation on the continent. It speaks to preventing illicit outflows of capital, but it must also speak to the need for Africa to develop its own capital markets, pools of savings that can then be reinvested so that we can start to limit our dependence on foreign loans. What has happened with countries is that, and South Africa is a significant exception on the continent, because when you borrow in foreign currencies, every time you've got an exchange rate differential, then your ability to afford to service that debt becomes harder and harder. And also, if you add to that countries that may be dependent on a single commodity like oil, when you have a change in the oil price and you have an exchange rate differential going against you, then countries really, really struggle. And the problem with indebtedness is it doesn't disappear. The situation gets aggravated, and that's what we need to guard against as well.
Mr. Manuel, the Africa Free Trade Agreement, intra-Africa trade, 17%. All the delegates that I've spoken to so far have said that needs to change. What would be your recommendations with regards to that to get Africa trading with each other at a higher percentage? And if the G20 presidency has to be the format, South Africa's G20 presidency has to be the necessary tool for that to happen.
Look, I'm very critical of the amount of intra-African trade, including that by South Africa. We don't import nearly enough from the rest of the African continent. And so we mustn't pretend that we are holier than thou. There needs to be a significant change. And amongst the proposals that we have spoken of and that we have to work at is to better develop prospective flows of goods and services between countries. So it's not just about having an agreement on continental free trade. It's also about being able to assist countries to decide on rationally what gets traded. Now that's a body of deep economics that would have to be undertaken. And what we hope to do with the Africa Expert Panel report, we'll discuss it with the African heads of state who are here in Johannesburg. We'll discuss it with them this Friday. If they support the idea or if they adjust the idea, we hope to take it to the African Union heads of state meeting in the middle of February to try and get some endorsement for work that must be done going forward. And then we can unleash the energy. The big advantage that the Africa Expert Panel report has is that we have the big Pan-African institutions, the African Development Bank, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and the African Union. Each has a member on the expert panel, and we will bring in another important organization, which is more of a policy body rather than a lending organization. It's the African Center for Economic Transformation. And if we can align these organizations with the ongoing support of the present panelists, we'll be able to develop some detailed proposals going forward and ensure that the proposals are owned by African countries.
Mr. Manuel, the United States of America, from a diplomatic level, of course, not attending the G20 summit. But I've been speaking to various leaders of business. I mean, I had Saab, and when they came back from the finance task force team, they had said that American investment from the business perspective still sees South Africa as a solid investment destination. Have you been having discussions with fellow colleagues within the United States from a business perspective in terms of how they see South Africa, despite the diplomatic tension between Pretoria and Washington?
I can't give you an honest answer because I'm not in government and I'm not in the B20 where I know that there are business people. The truth of the matter is that there are some businesses that are running scared and don't want to be on the wrong side of President Trump. That is the truth. There were people who were meant to be on various panels here and actually stepped back. They may be in the conference room but have stepped back from taking a high profile because they wouldn't like the businesses that they are part of to be on the wrong side of the bully behavior of Donald Trump. So it's a difficult issue. You've seen the good news for South Africa because all of our exports were meant to attract a very high tariff. I don't know what occasioned it, but in the past 10 days, they've dropped the tariffs on fruit imports, for instance, and hopefully others will follow. The difficulty is just that it's easier to know what the country wants, what policy choices it exercises, what you need to engage on, what you need to avoid. You can't deal with one person and his whims. And that's the difficulty at the moment.
Mr. Manuel, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
And that concludes day one of the B20 summit. And the message is quite clear. Inclusive growth is going to have to be implemented on the table to make sure that all economies across the world have economic growth on a fair basis. This is me, Faraz Patel, coming to you for Mzansi Welcomes the World at the B20 Summit. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.